some people advocate that if you accept welfare, you shouldn't be able to vote. I think there's entirely too much voting. We don't need any new laws. We have just one law, the non-aggression principle. That's about it. There are implications. How does it apply to intellectual property and this and that and the other? But we don't need all these laws. My understanding is in the U.S., at least, every year they've got like 10,000 pages of new laws.
Nobody reads them.
I don't think we need that. I just wanted to mention something on a different issue, this idea that Austrians forecast. To the extent that Austrians forecast, they're forecasting as non-Austrians. Because Austrian is a praxeological theory that has nothing to do with forecasting. It's a theoretical theory. So I think that Pierre's understanding of Austrianism, let me just say, it's very different than my understanding of Austrianism. Also, he says that Austrianism is a religion and that they don't test things. Well, that's right. We don't test things. Austrianism is a praxeological or a logical theory of economics. It's not an empirical theory of economics as the Chicagoan and as the mainstream theory is. Let me give you an example. I say that if I trade you your pen for my tie, that is, I give up my tie and I get your pen, you get my tie and you give me your pen, I say the following. I say that I value the pen that I'm going to receive more than the tie that I'm going to give up, and that you value it in the opposite way. You value the tie you're going to get more than the pen you're going to get. Now, I also say that if you understand the English language, you understand that it's impossible to test that. It's impossible to falsify that. The mainstream is a falsification view. The Austrian is not a falsification view. We say there's no way to test that. There's no way to test that, other things equal, when you raise the minimum wage or when you impose the minimum wage, you're going to unemploy people who have less productivity than the minimum wage level suggests. So the criticism of this is we're a religion, we're a cult, we don't believe in testing. Milton Friedman says, well, suppose two Austrian economists disagree. What can they do? Fight? Well, that's nonsense. Suppose two logicians disagree, or two mathematicians disagree, or two geometricians disagree. Is the only recourse to fight? I mean, that's silly. Can you imagine two mathematicians fighting? It's just silly. What they do is they go back over the logic, and they see which is illogical if they come up to different conclusions. But I think it's a very false allegation against Austrianism to say it's a cult or a religion. It's just name-calling, and I'm not going to call the other guys name-calling, but I will say that when the Carden-Kruger people, a very famous Princeton economist, said that the minimum wage law works differently, that it didn't cause unemployment, my claim is that if you scratch a good neoclassical economist, you'll find an Austrian. Because what these guys should have said, they should have said, oh, well, maybe economic law works differently in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. Or maybe there are exceptions to the minimum wage law. They didn't say that at all. They said, we're going to show those guys that are wrong. And one of the key elements of science is replicatability. So what they try to do is replicate their study. And they called up the same people and got the same data. And they found out that a lot of the places were broke and that the data was all wrong. But the point is they weren't open. The good mainstream economists were not open on the question of minimum wage. They were acting as Austrians. They knew praxeologically that if you demand that people pay $7 an hour and somebody's worth $5 an hour, he's not going to get employed. So I entirely reject this idea that economists forecast for the last 50 years and we're bound to be right sometime. This is a misunderstanding of Austrian economics. We do not forecast. And we do not forecast qua Austrians. We forecast as economic historians, which is a very different thing. And it's not a cult or a religion. I think that's just name calling.
Okay, I'll go back and forth. Yes. I'll take back the religion. If you read my little, if I could just add this one, if you read my little chapter on Austrian economics, you will see that I'm not as anti-Austrian as I might appear to be, or as Walter might, in his most rhetorical moment, make me like. Things like, will monetary policy during the crisis generate inflation or not, or have during the last 30 years? has expensive monetary policies generated inflation, or is it not the case? This should be testable, because with statistical techniques we can look at the periods where money supply was expanded or contracted. Even in different ways you can measure it. And the following inflation. These things are complicated. I'm not saying that they are simple, but Austrian economists have been telling us since the beginning of the recession that with short-term interest rates, they usually forget short-term, they say interest rates close to zero, that we'll have inflation. Well, we still don't have inflation. And actually the markets themselves forecast, because you can see the difference between indexed long-term government securities and non-indexed long-term securities. And the difference between both is, of course, what people expect as inflation. People expect over the next 10 years inflation rates of something between 2.6% and 3% of the market. Now, of course, the market might be wrong, and lots of people might make mistakes. But this sort of issue has to be addressed. I do believe myself that there is going eventually to be slightly more inflation, but not because there's 0% short-term interest rates, but because of quantitative easing, when the central bank started to try to influence long-term interest rates and pumped more money buying long-term securities. But all these things, and actually there are some Austrian economists who have tried to measure these things. If you read in the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics, that's the name of the journal. Quarterly Austrian Economics Review, or which?
Two, a Review of Austrian Economics and Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics.
I think it's the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics. There is an economist named James Keeler who tried to actually see if expansion of the money supply over the last 20 or 30 years has been followed, other things being equal, by increased inflation. And you can read the article. His conclusion is yes, but there are lots of things you can criticize there. But he's one economist, and there is another one, as far as I know, before him, who published this kind of analysis, and he probably ended up showing the contrary of what he did. So my only point here is that it might be that at the beginning of all science there are some definitions that are purely logical, but you have to have a way to test these in the real world. Especially when different people who are presumably using the same logic arrive to different conclusions. You have to have a way to decide who's right and who's wrong. Okay. And then I won't say anything, so you can't say anything now.
Jan might be familiar with this. The logical positivists, they believe that the test or the truth of the matter can only be determined by empirical testing. Austrians see it just as a matter of the coherence of the logic. If you're trying to find out whether increase in money supply increased prices, you have to know what would have happened had they not done that. You have to have contrary to fact conditionals, and they never have that. When I said that interest rates were zero, what I meant was the pure or originary rate of interest, or the prime rate of interest. Obviously, if you come and try to borrow money, the market rate of interest is based on that, plus inflation and risk and collateral and stuff like that. So you're not going to get a 25 basis point loan. So when I said zero, it's just roughly zero. I don't think I said zero exactly. I think I said a few basis points. If not, I might have misspoken.
Okay, next up are Lilia, Michael, and Louis.
Yes, this is regarding immigration and squatters' rights. And I'm particularly thinking of Walter's comments of looking down upon the Rockies and seeing it as empty and nothing there. Now, that to me seems to be a very city human point of view, because I think that there's all kinds of life flourishing there. I'm interested to know the attitude of libertarians toward other forms of life on this planet. Do we think that humans have a right to take over all land and to extinguish all other life? So that there's nothing in common, we don't leave anything for other animals.
Well, sure, but they'd be stupid to do so.
Pardon?
Of course they do. But would they do so if they had any sense? Obviously not. Consider, for example, the farmer who makes his living by selling milk. He needs a lot of cows. He doesn't want them extinguished. Consider the hunter who wants to shoot certain kind of animals. He wants them to exist so that he can hunt them, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, humans have a lot of interest in various other species in nature. But the claim that those species have a voice, as it were, themselves in their own right as moral entities is simply crazy. It is widely believed, but it's just nuts. And it is also extremely demeaning because it is always used to slap somebody or other in the face and say, here, we, the government, are going to get after you because you're being hard to hunt certain animals. Well, whose animals are they?
So as long as humans own those animals, then they can exist. So for example, like the sled dog owners have a right to massacre their dogs
Sure.
when they no longer use
Yeah.
them.
But would he do so? Not if he had any sense. Except in some cases when, of course, he would do so. I mean, for example, if he was starving in the Arctic, he would kill one of his animals to eat him to keep himself alive.
No,
I am in sympathy with the question. I think one of the weaknesses of libertarianism is the fact that we cannot use the non-aggression principle against people who torture animals. To me, torturing animals is a pretty despicable thing. And all I think we can do if we want to be compatible with the non-aggression principle is to boycott those people who torture animals, and I don't think that's enough. If anyone's got a great idea as to how we can reconcile the non-aggression principle with torturing of animals, I'd love to hear it. Now, I agree with Jan that the animals that go extinct are the ones that are not owned, extrapolating on what he was saying. The reason cow never went extinct is we had private property rights for cows. The reason the buffalo almost went extinct is because we didn't have private property rights in buffaloes.
Right.
There was this movie, Dances with Wolves, where the white man was supposedly killing buffalo. The Indians did too, because you couldn't own them. If you could own them and you could fence them in, and you know, we have to eschew those socialist songs about home on the range where the buffalo and the antelope roam. We don't want buffalo and antelope to roam. We want them to stay in barnyards so they can be safe. And the same thing applies to elephants. The reason the elephants are in danger of the rhinoceros is they're not owned. When they are owned, people take care of them. And one of the reasons for owning the oceans, which I'll get to in my lecture on tomorrow morning, is the whales and the fish are going extinct because of this thing called the tragedy of the commons. Murray Rothbard has this criteria. He wrote about this. Suppose we go to Mars and we discover creatures there. Let's say they look like octopuses, or they look weird. Do we shoot them, or do we consider them animals, or do we consider them rights-bearing creatures? And Murray had two criteria. One, that they have to articulate to us a request for rights. They have to say something that we can understand, and with translations, with all, from a God's eye point of view, that they have to petition for their rights, and they have to be able to respect our rights. Look, if animals had rights, when the lion killed the zebra, we put the lion in jail for murder? That's silly. You can't put the lion in jail for murder because the lion doesn't have whatever it takes to be a rights-bearing creature. And also, if you think, well, animals can suffer, so can plants. They put EEGs in plants, and when you pick them up, root them out of their roots, the EEG goes off the chart. So from a very pragmatic point, and some people are interested in pragmatism here, if we can't kill animals and eat them, and if we can't kill plants and eat them, we're toast. So just from a pragmatic point of view, we can't afford to give them rights. But on a more realistic basis, if you think that they have rights, then when the wolf kills the deer, you have to look upon the wolf as an evil creature. He's not evil, he's just doing what is his nature. He's a wolf, right.
But he's not a rational human creature with rights.
Okay. Michael, then